180 and we're at the speed down to 2,500.
Yep, point wherever you reduce speed to 180.
BlackBox.
Bam. All right, guys, and we're recording. Hey, so welcome to another episode of KP BlackBox. Ken's out of town, so I'll be holding it down for us today. Today, special guest Jason Falla, decorated combat veteran of the Australian Defence Force. He served 12 years in the Army Special Operations Command, 6 of those being with the Tier 1 Counterterrorist and Special Missions Unit, the Special Air Service Regiment. Following that, Jason founded Redback One Combat Training Systems. They've been in the game a little over 11 years, I want to say, and they've been pioneering the way for combat training systems and programs ever since. Jason, welcome.
Thanks, Blake. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm definitely excited. You and I have already been talking for almost an hour. You've been given so much good information. I wish we were already recording, but that's cool. Hey, we'll dive back into it, and we'll make sure the guests and everybody kind of hears all your opinions, your experiences, and everything you've been through so far.
Sounds good.
So I guess we'll kind of get right to it. Just a little bit of a background. I know right now you're running Redback One. If you just kind of give us a brief overview of the company, the vision, and what you're trying to accomplish with that.
Right. So, we started Redback One in 2010, and the vision for the company was really to provide training services to U.S. military and law enforcement in particular, and be able to run my own training curriculum. Coming from a military instructor background as well, it's really important to me to be able to write and deliver that training and education the way that I want to do it. So when I first got out of the unit and came over to the United States, I worked for a rather large private security company located in North Carolina, and I was there as a CONUS instructor and worked a lot with U.S. Special Forces, also naval special warfare, etc., and got to really learn more about the United States military and in particular special operations, how they operate. And then when I left that company in 2010, my vision was to stand up our own training company that could deliver our own training curriculum and to also a much higher standard than what I believe was out there currently.
Right. Yeah, Jason, I definitely I remember I think the first introduction we had, I actually went through your night vision operators course. I want to say that was a 2-day. All right, that was the entry level.
Right. And
it was fantastic, man. Some of the best shooting I've ever done. We still talk about it till today at work.
I appreciate that.
The guys love it. We left there and we took a lot of those shooting drills you had, started implementing it with our guys, and they love it. They're growing, so it's awesome. We're going to definitely drop a link to your company below, website. Guys, check it out. If you haven't heard of them, which I'm sure you have, type it in Google, and I promise he's going to change the game for you guys. So Ken, one thing Ken likes to do is he always makes a toast to service members who are currently serving, have served, first responders, and everybody else out there. So I just want to say thank you for your service, thanks for your doing, and we appreciate you. So Jason, I was thinking there's so many things I can talk to you about, but I've got a limited amount of time, and we realized that we've come up on the 20th anniversary of Operation Anaconda.
Right.
So I'd say we get right into it, and I'd love to kind of hear your experiences with this. And for those of you that don't know, Operation Anaconda was one of the first biggest operations since or post 9/11 since Tora Bora. Multiple coalition forces were involved. It took place in and I don't want to do a disservice to the language. I've heard it pronounced different ways: Shahid-Kot Valley, sure, which later became known as the Hell's Half-Pipe. So if you can kind of give us a rundown of your experiences with that and what it was like serving on the Australian side, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. So Operation Anaconda, when we moved out of Kandahar, we repositioned up into Bagram and occupied a small area up in one of the hangars there. And, when we knew that this operation was coming about, we were excited to be part of it. We had our planners go in and assist with the planning phase for, what we were going to do, and based on the fact that it was going to be a coalition, a US-led coalition to go in there to conduct this operation, obviously it was very complex. From the conventional side, there was 101st Airborne guys, Task Force Rakissan, who were going to be making up the majority of the ground forces down through the valley. They were augmented, I believe, by the 10th Mountain Division as either a reserve or another battalion that was going to go in there and reinforce Task Force Rakissan on the valley floor. And then there was also a separate component down there, which was the AFO teams that were running the Northern Alliance and anti-Taliban forces, etc. Outside of that, there were blocking forces set up across the valley, and then also selected positions for OPs by Coalition Special Forces. And so the whole concept of operation was a strangulation, hence the name Operation Anaconda, which was to drive and strangle that valley, as the operation took place. And if there was going to be squirters out through the valley, the blocking forces were going to get them. We'd keep eyes on from up on the features there to see what was going on and direct any close air support as needed, or direct fire support or whatnot. And this was going to be the biggest operation, I believe, of the campaign. From Tora Bora, once the United States had sort of got an idea, an indication of where bin Laden was, and they suspected that he was in Tora Bora, and US Special Forces went after him there, and it was a bit of a dry hole for them, that they realised that, hey, he could have been pushed out of there, and he may have moved into that Sharikot Valley, Gardez area, whatever, but they identified that as the next part. I think what the major issues were initially was the lack of intelligence when it came to locating the enemy and their position, strength and numbers, and that was always assessed differently, whether it was 100 to 1,000. It's a pretty big variation of enemy fighters. And I think a lot of that intelligence or lack thereof was due to the fact that they didn't have eyes on target or boots on the ground there to provide that strategic and also tactical reconnaissance, because they also didn't want to give the game away. Inserting patrols into that area meant bringing them in with a rotary wing aircraft or an airframe, whether it's going to be a 47 or similar, and that could also have spooked the enemy in that area to push out of there based on the fact, hey, we've got enemy... from their perspective, enemy helos operating in the area, what's going on. So they wanted to try and preserve the element of surprise as best that they could, and try to get the AFO teams in there on foot to get up into the mountains, just a bit of an AO recon, basically, to see, hey, what's achievable. First of all, it was the middle of winter. Not great conditions to be fighting a war. But not only that, obviously, the other part to it was that the altitudes were up to and above 10,000 feet. And if you're familiar with, altitude sickness and whatnot, that typically occurs in and around that height. So there was concerns, about being able to operate up there. And our patrol is a specialist mountain warfare patrol. We're all mountain warfare operators and instructors. And so we were selected as the patrol to occupy the highest feature there, which is above 10,000, and be able to get eyes on target and operate above the snow line and above 10,000 feet. And that was part of our role up on that job. As it started to shape and take place, the elements on the ground and our LNOs that were in position there, we had two LNOs that were with the 10th Mountain Division, and then we had our guys attached with the AFO teams pushing from a different area past the Whaleback. They came under heavy fire as soon as they entered into the valley, and they soon realised that they'd underestimated the strength of the enemy and also their tenacity and dispositions within the features themselves. So part of the problem was that, from historical reports from Russian encounters in through that area through the 80s and the Civil War, they kind of realised that this is a stronghold, an enemy stronghold that had been fought before, that area had been fought in before. And it didn't go that well. So they knew that there was key terrain that was being occupied by the enemy, which is why we wanted to have patrols inserted above on those features to try and occupy and hold that key terrain. But we also didn't know, and I'm not sure if the planners necessarily knew where the positions were, and not only that, what type of weapon systems were going to be employed by the enemy from those positions. Obviously, it was very mountainous, it was very rocky, there was key terrain left and right side of the valley, the Whaleback feature itself was called that because it looked like a whale's hump coming out of the ocean type of thing.
Right.
So it was designated the whaleback. And that was heavily defended too. And so once the task forces went in on the valley floor, they were under direct enemy fire from belt-fed weapons, individual weapons. They had mortars coming into their position. The terrain and the valley floor was not in great shape to be fighting in. It was muddy. They also had, unexploded ordnance in and around their position from mortars that were duds or didn't go off. They were under an immense amount of fire, and I want to say in the first couple of days of that operation, they had 30-odd wounded infantry fighters on the ground, which had to be evacuated. No one was killed, luckily, but they had 30-odd casualties. As they conducted that fighting withdrawal back out of there, they wanted to obviously push back in and try to figure this out. And when they went in again, they were brought under significant amounts of fire, and a lot of that came from DF positions from the hills, where they were operating mortar base plates that were already dug in and sighted in to provide pretty accurate fire inside of its effective range. 5,700 meters on some of those mortar systems, and that was well inside the effective range of where the US forces and coalition forces were, and where they were pushing through. So they were having difficulty pushing down that valley initially. There was a massive attempt to bring in air cover to soften up some of those features as well. So whether that was with A-10s, there was also B-52s that were brought in. I remember being in OP looking up, and a B-52 has released its payload. I want to say it's about 15 or 17 seconds of flight time before those bombs hit the ground. So when they release them, they're released away from you, and then it travels over your position and into the target area. There were JDAMs, laser guided munitions, smart munitions being brought in, all kinds of stuff to provide more direct fire onto some of those enemy positions. And it was working pretty well, and it allowed the battle to sort of shape a little bit better, and for the task force to get in on the valley floor. Now, we and my patrol, we were inserted by a Russian Mi-17 Helo. We flew out of Bagram. We flew in to what we believed was our proper insertion point, and unfortunately, the pilots couldn't get us into the position that we'd selected as our insertion point. And when we were released out of the aircraft, we had to call the aircraft back in to come and get us, to reposition us to a better location. As we deployed into the second lock, it wasn't that great. And so we were starting to set up, and that's when we got the call. I want to say it was early hours of the morning, that we'd heard that there was an issue with another US Special Forces element that was in contact, and they had some serious problems. That came to be that one of the SEALs had fallen out of the helo, which was Roberts at that point, was on the ground. There was an understanding from our position that a helo had been hit, or that there was some other something was very confusing going on, and a lot of that information was sort of coming at us at real time through our communication suites. And so we were asked to we were redirected to get eyes on the crash site of that helo. So we understood that there was a helo down, and this obviously panned out through. Once we saw the predator feed of what actually occurred, once we got back, we realised exactly what had happened. But when you're there on the ground, you're only receiving information at bits, sort of fits and starts through your systems to sort of generally understand what's happening. But we got a new mission to redirect from where we currently were to a new location on a different feature, to get eyes on the crash site and provide whatever kind of support that we could in order for the recovery efforts and QRF to come in to be able to secure the crash site and be able to recover anyone who was on the ground. So at that point, our patrol, we moved out real early. I remember, to this day, nearly 20 years ago, it was below freezing, I want to say we were close to 10,000 feet at that point, or really close to it. I was wearing basically my camis and freezing, sitting on my rucksack in the snow, shivering, just waiting to get going. Obviously, when you know that there's a really serious walk about to happen, and our rucksacks, like in Afghanistan, our rucksacks are weighing 60 kilos, about 120 something pounds is what our rucksacks were weighing. We thought we were going in on a 48-hour mission. I want to say it was like March 2-3 time frame of when this operation kicked off. And we thought we were only going to be in there for about 48 hours before everything was done and dusted and we get extracted. Obviously, we planned to be out there a little bit longer than that with regards to our rations and water. But the timeline was, hey, it's a 48-hour kind of gig. You're to be there in position, get eyes on, and do what you need to do whilst you're up there. So we didn't take necessarily a lot, but we also brought in an attachment to our patrol, which was a combat controller from the United States Air Force. He's a good friend of mine today, but he had some issues with his selection of equipment and footwear, and he's also his physical fitness integrating with an SAS patrol. It must have been a bit of a shock to the system knowing that you're going to be attached to an SAS patrol, because we are extremely good out in the field and under rucksack. And, you've got to be on point when it comes to physical fitness to sort of hang with some of the stuff that we do out there. And so anyway, we were retasked to get to this new feature, which meant we had to get off this feature, get down to a valley and climb up the next feature and get eyes on target as fast as possible. So we knew this was going to be a pretty hellacious kind of walk. So we're there ready to go. It was before first light. We're packed up, ready to walk out of there, and we're going to be walking during the day. Obviously in fairly enemy-held sort of territory at that point. I was one of the patrol medics attached, or as part of our patrol. The way that we operate is that we have a lot of redundancy with our skill sets within the team. We have redundancy in expert communicators, that if our primary comms guy gets hit, we've always got redundancy within the team. If our medic gets hit, we've always got redundancy in the team. So every second man essentially has those two skills. And then we have a patrol leader, a patrol commander, and two IC. And then the other three positions within the team are made up as a medic, a commo guy, and a specialist or scout. And then our attachment was our CCT Air Force controller. So,
are you guys? Are y'all set up pretty similar to a U.S. ODA?
I think we're smaller than an
Okay.
ODA. Normally, we were operating as a 5-man or a 6-man team on the ground. And obviously, the purpose of SAS is to conduct strategic special reconnaissance. That's our job: surveillance and reconnaissance anywhere on the planet, and be undetectable while we're doing it. And we do a pretty good job at it too. And part of the reason why we're on that mission is because we were asked to be part of that mission because of our skill set and capability and being able to stay on target for a long duration. And that's why we were asked to go and be part of this mission. So we'd walked down, we'd gone along the valley floor, and it's taken us several hours to get to this part, and then we were to walk up the next feature. And the next feature was really steep. I mean, it was... you talk about your selection course and things that you do in selection, preparing you for warfare. Some of the things I did in Afghanistan were worse than selection. And I realised why selection is so difficult and so challenging, and why you need to have that mindset, that intestinal fortitude, that tenacity, that desire to continue the mission and never give up, that the mission is number one, and your welfare and your comfort is last. And it's because of these types of situations that in battle you just never know, what the conditions are going to be like. It has to prepare you about as close to that as possible. From the mindset side, there were times there that I look back on selection and I'm like, okay, I get it. And so we were climbing up this feature, and my rucksack was super heavy. My weapon system was heavy. The amount of ammo that we were carrying, everything was just heavy and just dragging. I was several hours in at this point. I was carrying a 249 with 1,000 rounds of ammo, a 60-odd pound rucksack, and obviously there's a lot of weight to be carrying up a feature, and then approaching about 10,000 feet, right? So we also noticed that our STS guy was struggling, and me being a medic, I was noticing signs that he was not doing so well, that he might not make this climb. And so I approached him and I said, "Hey, you all right? Everything cool?" And he's like, he's trying to hang in there mentally, right? At that point, I saw his eyes starting to loll about a little bit, and I knew he was like 2 paces forward, 1 pace back as he's going up. And so I just let the patrol commander know that, hey, I'm not sure if he's going to make it up there. And patrol commander was, the timeline is the timeline. We've got to make it. Whatever you need to do to him, he's got to get up to the feature. We've got to be there by this time. And so I went with him, kind of encouraging him to get going kind of thing, and moving him up there. And it became a point where, he wasn't going to go any further. So we had to stop the patrol, take all his gear off of him. We disseminated a lot of his batteries. He had a couple of radios that he was operating, and a lot of batteries, obviously, to maintain his ability to maintain comms for a long duration. So we disseminated his batteries across the patrol. We had our scout carry his rucksack as well as his own. So scout was carrying 2 rucksacks, and our controller was basically in his web gear at that point with his rifle, and me there with him, encouraging him to try and make this climb up this hill. By the time we got up to the top, which was an hour later, he pretty much collapsed on the ground and went unconscious at the top.
And once we got hypoxic, or do you think it was just fatigue, or what?
It was fatigue. Yeah, he was dehydrated, and he was just completely fatigued from the climb. And whether there was some altitude sickness in there as well, I'm not sure, but he was unconscious. And there's straight. This is when he's supposed to be operating the radio and getting some air cover. And so we were like, okay, he's unconscious. We need to revive him as fast as possible. So we got 2 bags of fluid into him as quick as we could, and it took the second bag before he sort of came to. Got a brew on, so some warm fluids, warm him up a little bit, get a couple of bags of fluid into him, and he came good after another half an hour or so. And then we were like, hey, get on your radio and start calling in some aircraft, because absolutely. The boys over there are in contact and they need some fire support. So at that point, he got on comms, and look, he's an outstanding communicator. Like what he was able to achieve when he was up there is phenomenal, and that was a testament to the success of our patrol up on the feature there. So what we thought we were going into was a 48-hour patrol that wound up being about 11 days on target, and we'd prepared for 2. So we soon realised. And one of the other things, basically operating in that mountainous terrain, we realised that what if we get extended? And we'd been extended, like I've been extended several times in different theatres and things that I've done. Like in East Timor, for example, when we were in the jungles there and our extraction was a rotary wing extraction, if there was heavy fog or something that the helos couldn't fly in due to the terrain, we knew we were going to get a timeline extension, 24-hour extension, or a delay on the extraction. And so if we were going to get an extension in the field, we were going to bring in additional supplies with us. I remember on one patrol in East Timor, we had it was during the dry season, which means there's no water, it doesn't rain, and so you've got to carry 10 litres of water with you for the duration. Now my longest patrol in the dry season was, I think it was 9 days, and under the conditions that you're operating in, you should be drinking 8 litres of water a day, and we've only got 10 litres for 9 days. And so you're really kind of sipping your water and making it last. And we never touch the 2 litres on our belt unless it's an emergency, which means we've got either 10 or 8 litres in our pack, but 10 litres total typically. So 8 litres in your pack, 2 on your belt. And so really you've got 8 litres of water for 9 days of work. And it doesn't really compute very well. So you're always dehydrated. So one of the first things, as a medic, you're always going to put fluid into a person if they have difficulty. And there was times in East Timor where I had to put fluid into some of our patrol members just based on how arduous the work was. But there's times there where we got off a helo and we had 2 jerry cans of water each, as well as our rucksack. And our rucksacks were, I think in East Timor, they were about, during the dry season with all that water, carrying 10 litres, it's 10 kilos of water, plus, the amount of equipment that you need, mission essential items and whatnot, 30 kilos, 60, 70 pounds of gear in your rucksack. And plus 2 jerry cans, which is 20 litres of water, so that's 40 kilos, plus your 30 on your back, that's 70 kilos, about 140 odd pounds, plus your web gear and your rifle, it's another 20 pounds of gear. So you're weighing up there, it's your body weight in gear that you're carrying. And then you're carrying uphill, get to your OP so you can sustain yourself for longer durations on target. And so, we're used to this kind of thing. So, in Afghanistan on Anaconda, we realised that this could be a possibility that we don't get out on time. So we had a DZ box that we kicked out a whole bunch of rations and additional supplies that if we needed it, we could go back and get it. So we kicked that out and marked it with the GPS and then and kind of cached it and moved to our OP, which was a long way off, to be honest. And so once we realised that we were extended in position after the helo went in, and now we've got this mission change, after a while we're like, okay, we've got no food. We didn't have any water. We were above the snow line, so we were actually boiling snow. So where we were on the top of that feature, we had to be cautious and careful that we stayed on the reverse slope, so we weren't silhouetting our position to the enemy, which meant that as we were moving to our OP right on the edge, we had to be on our guts crawling into our OP. We couldn't be standing up, we couldn't walk there. We could walk a certain way, but as soon as we got to a point, we had to be on our guts crawling in, and then we'd be on glass pretty much for the duration of our stint at OP. And so back there, if you're not on duty, you're basically on rest until you need to go into the OP again. And so if you don't have any water, well, part of your requirement and duties now are to get snow, boil water, and start to fill all your water bottles to make sure that we're good to go. Plus, we didn't know how long that snow was going to last. It wasn't like it was super deep snow, but it was in the snow line. But we knew that there's potential for this snow to melt and disappear, and we'd have no water. So, part of what we were doing is trying to collect as much snow, boiling it, and putting it into water bottles, and try to sustain ourselves with water at least for a longer duration. And we saw all this luscious snow on the other side of the feature. We just couldn't touch because we couldn't disturb that side because the enemy might have sprung us. And so we just had to stay on our side, and there wasn't a lot of snow on that side. So we ended up having to send a patrol down to recover the DZ box and get more food for us, because now we were there for 11 days. We didn't know how long we were going to stay there for, but we now had to go and get this resupply of food that we kicked out of the helo on the way in. So that sustained us for a lot longer. I think part of the other things that the mission and what unfolded and what's written in books and stuff like that is one thing, but it's the personal experiences that sometimes don't get captured in those books. And one of them is that we took tents because in that environment you can't live outside on the ground as much as you want to stay with a roll mat, a sleeping bag, and a bivy bag. That environment doesn't really lend itself for that. Just being that exposed at 10,000 feet, there's not a lot of warmth. Like the bags that you get issued and the environment, it's really cold. And so obviously you take tents to improve your living conditions, and obviously camming them up, digging them in, putting cam nets over top of them, making sure you're well concealed and everything else, even though you're living in a tent, is part of stuff that we learn on the mountain warfare courses and stuff like that. But when we took a two-man tent, we had an expert commo guy with us to provide additional comms, which meant we had 7 people on this patrol. 7 people, two-man tents, doesn't compute. So we're not going to carry an extra tent for one person. We're going to carry one tent for 3 people. 3 people in a two-man tent is not great. And so I was unfortunately part of the rotation on a 3-man situation in a 2-man tent, that we had 3 people in there and couldn't get any sleep, basically, because of how tight you are. It's like a sardine can at that point. And so we decided after, I want to say day 2, to kick one person out and go sleep in the snow for a night, and we'd rotate that person out. I remember when I rotated out there and slept in the snow, it was the worst night of my life. It was so cold. Bivy bag, sleeping bag, and a roll mat just doesn't cut it. And I don't think I got more than 20 minutes of sleep that entire night. And I just couldn't wait for the next night to be back in the tent. And it's those kind of situations you're like, man, we should have brought another tent just for that one person, because that was horrendous. But getting back to the fighting, when the helo went in and the SEAL team was out on the ground trying to recover Roberts. And I want to say Chapman was, just looking back in some of the historic sort of stuff there, obviously, Chapman put up a massive amount of fight there on the ground as he started to become a bit separated from his team on the ground, and that SEAL element there was a lot of chaos and confusion there, the fog of war, and not knowing necessarily where the enemy positions were. And they did a bang up job, getting themselves out of there as best as they could, and under those kind of conditions, being knee deep in snow and so much chaotic activity going on. That part of our job, was also to support their exfil off of that feature and get them out of there, as well as it was to try and protect and provide some kind of security by close air support with the other helo that went in after the rescue force came in, and it got banged up as well when it took an RPG through the skin of the aircraft, and that aircraft went in. There was obviously some casualties on the ground there with the Rangers coming off the back ramp. The pilots, I want to say, got hit as well. So there's a lot of, terrible things going on that feature. And part of our job was to supply close air support to allow them to get out of there. At that point, they weren't going to commit any more airframes in there as a medevac. So even though they had casualties, men down, casualties dead, all that kind of stuff, that they just couldn't bring in aircraft and commit aircraft in there because they had man pads, they had stingers in the area that they'd already known about from other activities and stingers being fired at aircraft from the valley floor. They had RPGs and anti-aircraft guns that were known about as well. And because it was so hot at that point, they weren't going to bring in other aircraft just in case they got hit as well. So at that point, I remember hearing, they were just continually asking for other aircraft to come in and support for extraction and medevac, etc. And they just weren't getting it. And I do remember watching the 47s come in. They had gunships either side, AH-64, I want to say they were Apache gunships, flanking one of the I want to say they brought in another helo to try and get them out, and they were just taking fire on the way in, and they just couldn't get in, and they'd turn around and go back out again. So I knew that they were in pretty dire straits up there. So part of our mission was to actually support what they were doing. Now, once we were up there, we had pre-designated targets that we knew about, which were obvious, that we were providing grid references to and dropping bombs on top of those positions to support. And then there was, other, certainly the understanding of where the forward line of troops were on the ground, so that we didn't accidentally drop bombs or anything too close to where friendly forces were, because we couldn't see them on the valley floor. But what we could see across the valley was the enemy fighters. We could see where they were moving up into. We could see them on the ridge line silhouetting themselves. We were on glass, 60 power sights and stuff like that, spotting scopes and binos and whatnot, just watching where they were and what they were doing and where they were concentrating their forces. So we were able to then identify that on the map, pinpoint where that was, and bring in JDAMs, to hit those specific areas. And we did a really good job at supporting the boys on the ground there. We also identified over time where their rat lines were and lines of communication from where they were fighting and where they were receiving their reinforcements from and some of their caches. And once we discovered where they were, we would direct AC-130s in onto those targets. I want to say there was a time there where we had almost all of the AC-130s stacked up, ready to play. They'd come in, check in, let us know what armaments they had, how much ammo they had, and their playtime of being on station, and we'd send them home, Winchester, one after the other. They would expend all their ordnance, they'd go back, rearm, and then jump back in and try to get back in the fight as best as they could. We'd ask them for BDAs of after they'd put a few 105s and whatnot, some of the Bofors and whatever else, they'd go in. And we'd ask them for BDA, and I just remember one of the pilots came back and said, "Well, we're following a trail of cold dead bodies." I'm like, right on. So we knew we were doing a good job. As a result of that, I think we were awarded over 300 kills of enemy combatants just with our work up there. So we were able to kind of hold off some of the main enemy fighters coming in there with our air support and coverage of what was going on to allow US forces that were either up on that feature or trying to push through the valley, give them enough time to do what they needed to do.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, there were so many moving parts. It's impressive what you guys were able to do. That's awesome. I know you had that's one story, but I know Australia's involved in all kinds of stuff. You know what I mean? So you guys are all over the world. What else is it?
If there's a fight, Australia's going to be there.
Yeah, you're not kidding. You boys are just eager to get into it.
We just don't tell anyone we're going to be there.
Yeah, you definitely don't.
We fly under the radar a lot.
No, you definitely do. That's awesome. Good for you guys. And I know another known fact about that battle is up until a few years ago, I want to say a Canadian sniper held the record for one of the longest kills there. I think it was right over like a mile and a half, like 1.51 or something like that.
Yeah, I'd heard the story.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, look, it's one of those things, from the sniper community. I was an assaulter, not a sniper.
Right.
So I don't, I try to stay in my lane as much as I can. But I know from the sniper community, all the snipers are trying to get the longest shot or the most, whatever it is that they're trying to achieve with their skill set. And I think when they'd heard that, it was a pretty good story. You hear a lot that, not that it's a good story or anything like that, but obviously from the marksmanship side and the amount of field craft and skill set that are put into shots like that, whether it was on purpose, accidental or not, he achieved the aim.
Yeah, regardless.
And now it's one enemy combatant taken off the battlefield, which is great, right? We had similar stories of weapon systems and engaging threats that are just outside the effective range of what you would typically see a weapon system being fired at. But the snipers would have a crack at it, and whether they hit the target or not, it came down to, those are the types of situations where that skill set really comes into its own, that, hey, you might be outside the effective range, but can you still get around on target, outside of what you're trained to engage at, right? And that's where the craft really comes into it. So that's what I really applaud in that skill set, that extremely patient, extremely good marksmanship, good understanding of the weapons platform, the ballistics, and being able to get around on target at those ranges is phenomenal.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Definitely impressive. Hey, what actually brought you to the U.S. anyway? So after doing all this, how'd you end up here?
Yeah, I got out of the unit. It was one of those things where when the Australian government brought us and the Special Operations Group out of the campaigns, out of Afghanistan and Iraq, put us kind of on a training cycle back to the unit. It kind of rubbed a lot of people the wrong way that we wanted to be back in the fight. We saw our US counterparts still being over there, still mixing it up, and we just wanted to get back and be part of it and support. And that's always met with the local population, the citizens of Australia didn't think that was anything that we should be involved in necessarily. In America's wars, it's really you really sort of feel it from that side. Australia is typically a peacetime military, and mostly our special forces get involved in things, whether it's war or non-war-like type operations. But when it came down to these major campaigns like Afghanistan and Iraq, based on the relationship that Australia has with the United States, we're always going to be there. That's right. Part of the agreement. And so, the Australian population knew that we were going, and it wasn't taken very well by the public. They didn't think we should be going. They wanted us back as early as possible. And so, the government, I guess, was under a lot of pressure to achieve its aim over there and get out. And it wasn't for several years later until they recommitted back in. But during that time that we weren't recommitted to the fight, we started losing a lot of our corporate knowledge by senior operators getting out of the unit and getting on the contracting scene and, being in a part of private military groups and whatnot, contracting in Afghanistan and Iraq and all that kind of stuff. And so I thought, I might do something similar, but instead of doing that, I might, see how I can go to the United States and do something over there. I feel like I always wanted to come over to America and work over here and live over here and sort of help out where I could. And so I ended up coming over. I lived for a short amount of time in Indiana, and then I made my way over to...
Why Indiana?
So the person that I was with at the time and married...
I figured it had to be something like that.
Yeah, we don't typically talk about that too often, but everyone can make a mistake here and there. But I ended up getting a green card by marrying a US citizen. Mm-hmm. We didn't last that long and divorced not that long after. But outside of those sort of personal things, from the professional side, I really wanted to utilise my skill set to a much higher standard, right? So now I'm out of the unit, fresh off the boat, essentially, in the United States. through the old boy network, and my former team leader was actually on the 2-year PEP billet with Naval Special Warfare, and he was out at Fort Knox on an urban warfare training event. He knew I was living in Indiana. I went down there to help support some of the stuff that he was doing, and he said, "Hey, you know what? I got a friend of mine who's the sergeant major from SBS, who's out there as a director of training at Blackwater. You should call him up and go get a job." So I did. They brought me out, did my shooting test, interview, and got a job at Blackwater, and I worked there for about 5 years. So that was, one of my first long-term jobs since I got out of the unit and came over here, and that's where I got really good exposure to US military and how Army operates, how Navy operates. Worked with the Marines, worked with the Coast Guard. I pretty much worked with all branches of services. Air Force, etc., to understand how what tactics, techniques, and procedures, their SOPs, and everything else. And what that allowed me to do when I started Redback One is understand that there are differences with regards to tactics, techniques, and procedures and SOPs from Army and Navy, how they handle their weapons, how they prosecute their targets, how they conduct their CQB, and all that kind of stuff is different. One's not right, one's not wrong. They're just different branches of service that train to different standards and have different ways of doing things. So that's one good thing I think about our company and me being from Australia is that I don't have a dog in the fight when it comes to Army-Navy stuff over here. And those that are caught up in between, we see a lot of Air Force elements, whether it's support elements to special operations or whatnot, that don't get access to some of the training activities that the tiered units get to, but they still require training in advanced shooting skills, CQB, and that kind of thing, that they might not know who they might get attached to next time. It could be an Army element, it could be a Navy element, but they just need to be able to integrate. They need advanced skill sets that allows them to be an asset on the team and not a liability. Yeah. And so where we come in is, we can ask them, hey, who are you likely to go out with, Army or Navy? And we can superimpose those tactics, into their training and say, okay, you're going out with an Army unit. Typically, Army operate with these kind of SOPs and TDPs, and we can train them to that standard. We also work with elements like, for example, the mobile units, EOD mobile units from the Navy. Different mobile units get attached to different elements. Some are specific to Naval Special Warfare, others get piecemealed out to Army, depending on their specialist skill sets. But really, they just need to be able to be upskilled in combat marksmanship and things like CQB, again, just so they're an asset and not a liability once they hit the ground. Obviously, their job is to provide that specialist skill set and as an attachment to the team operating on the ground, but they can't be a safety risk or a liability to their team. And I think that's what we do really well, is to be able to provide those advanced skill sets to not just tiered elements, but also the supporting elements to some of those units that just don't get access to the kind of training that a lot of the teams get. Further to that, on the law enforcement side, as you well know, that we work a lot with US law enforcement elements across the country, mostly with SWAT and SRTs, to provide advanced level training in all those skill sets: advanced combat shooting, marksmanship, close quarters battle, night vision operations, vehicle tactics, and so those are the type of spaces that we typically reside in with our training.
Yeah, I definitely like how you guys approach the law enforcement training. Y'all seem to have like a building block y'all use, and there's actually a goal of what you're trying to achieve for each training day,
right?
Which I really, really enjoyed. Even down to like your shooting courses, the ORTs and whatnot. I like how it takes like basic platforms, builds you up. That way it goes to big picture, right? So how do we start applying these fundamentals in a house and whatnot? What's your guys' method behind doing that? Like,
yeah, it's it stems from my military instructional background. I was talking to you before, just offline, a little bit about some of the training that I've done with regards to becoming an instructor within the military system and the Army training system itself. It's much like the United States training system, which has its own methodology and building block approach to training, and we have something very similar. But when you go through courses like that, where you understand the blueprint for a lesson, how obviously the introduction, the main body, and the conclusion of an instructional objective, having your teaching points or points of performance, being out in front of you and understanding what needs to be delivered in terms of training. We then understand there's going to be a test of objectives for that lesson, and that test of objectives needs to link to another lesson or potentially link to that module or that block of instruction which might have an enabling objective to it, which could be part of the key competency or the core competencies of what you're trying to teach, which might have a terminal learning objective. And so the course starts to build out from individual training through to collective training, for example, like on a CQB course. Although we don't have the luxury of having 5 or 6 weeks or 8 to 10 weeks, whatever it is, as the length of time required to teach someone in basic and advanced CQB, we might only have a 5-day block. And so what we have to do with that 5 days is pick those key elements of competency which allows students to be able to understand it, absorb the information, replicate it, and pretty much demonstrate a workable solution and to a workable standard. They might not be at a tier 1 standard by the end of the 5 days, just due to the fact that we don't have enough time to go through that training and get them there. But they need to be able to be at a safe, workable standard that when we release them, that they can then train on those things to determine, hey, how capable are we at being able to produce this in real time. Mm-hmm. So as much as we like to deliver a capability, sometimes it's hard to say, well, by the end of this course, you will be qualified to be able to do X, Y, and Z. That's a really difficult statement to meet based on the fact that we don't have the time to get them to that competency or that proficient sort of standard, right? And so, from the building block approach, we incorporate not just standard demonstration performance methods of explanation, demonstration, imitation when it comes to a lot of the stuff that we do, but we also have to understand that there's got to be advanced adult learning and advanced learning techniques put in there to advance the learning at a much faster pace. And some of it we can do and some of it we can't do based on the time that we have with the students. For example, we might not have enough time for discovery learning, where we set out something for the students to be able to do, whether it's with a dry evolution or with paint or something like that they might need to do, like work a barricade or angle man corner boy type situation of a room combat scenario. And then when they do it and they get it wrong or we debrief what's going on, it's like, hey, what happened? What did you like? What didn't you like? Why didn't it work? How could you do it better? And have this sort of discovery moment where they say, well, you know what, I could probably approach it from a better angle, get more of an angle on it, more distance, depending on are we doing hostage rescue, are we doing deliberate clearance, and they can start to discover a better way of doing it for themselves. That's fantastic for learning because it really does encourage the individual to take on the ownership of the drill itself or the technique. But we might not have that time sometimes. So sometimes we have to provide the information to them. This is a technique. This is how you do it. Give them a demonstration, and then they imitate it. So we explain what they're doing, demonstrate it, and then they go and do it. And what I've come to realize, from the cognitive psychology side of learning, is that, from say law enforcement, where law enforcement SWAT teams do operations all the time, whether it's a high risk warrant service to hostage rescue, barricaded gunman or subject. Either way, a lot of these operations that you guys do require you to enter and clear a structure. And you've got a lot of repetition in doing that, a lot of operations. Now, whether we see that as the way that you're doing it is the way that we would want you to do it or not, you've got the experience in doing it. And so because you come at a level of experience, it's easy to dovetail in what we're doing to bring you to the next level. It may be a slight change of tactics or techniques, but typically because you understand weapon handling, advanced weapon handling, CQB, room clearance, speed, surprise, violence of action, that there's the door procedures, entry procedures, movement procedures, and we just need to tweak that or maybe adjust it. It means that you can accelerate your learning to a much faster standard as well, or to a higher degree in a shorter amount of time. Part of the thing is, or part of what we have to do is also coach individuals, whether it's in firearms training, that there's an understanding that, from the coaching side is, hey, there's some things that you're doing wrong. You're not doing it globally wrong. Like, you're doing a pretty good job, but from the coaching side, I can improve you. So that's where we have operator standards, for example, where here's a good example, the rifle to pistol transition. I get you to do that on day one of a combat shooting course and just see how you perform. I can videotape that performance, depending on the length of the course we have. I can record your performance visually. I can record your speed at which you did it, and also your marksmanship. Did you hit your 2 rounds, 1 rifle, 1 pistol, on that target within a certain distance, within a certain time frame? And so from there we can gather data from that based on your time and accuracy, compare that against what the standard is. Now, the standard for, I think this is where some folks kind of get muddled up a little bit with their training, is that you might be a collateral duty law enforcement SWAT team that only gets to train once a month and a 40-hour block of instruction once a year. I can't expect you to be at a tier 1 standard of combat shooting within the first week, but I need to get you to a standard that's commensurate with your level of employment. So we obviously understand, the tiered structure, say from NTOA's tiered structure of tier 1, 2, and 3 SWAT teams, whether it's their capability, their numbers of assaulters, the numbers of team leaders, number of snipers, where they have, rotary wing, fast rope, night vision, explosive breaching, all these types of things that are required for different team statuses. That in and amongst that also is that it could be a full-time team, which means you have more time to train on things like marksmanship, which means that you should be at a higher standard than a collateral duty team that doesn't get to train as often. So we have a tiered approach to our standards and understand that, look, based on your job description and employment, you should be at this level. And now the level could be that the 10 drills that we have on the combat shooting side, you might only need to pass 5 out of the 10. At a tier 1 standard, you should be able to pass 8 to 10 of them without any training, right? So there's a realistic expectation that you have to be able to understand how to do those operator standards for close quarters marksmanship. You've got to be able to pass a certain amount of them to pass the objectives for the training, but then also have the ability or a pathway to excellence to say, well, how do I get better from here? And so that's what we provide as well, is a clear path which is provided by training and teaching and the feedback from performance and mentoring, that this is how you get to the next level. And so we don't just fire and forget the training and say, well, look, you guys failed. You're not at a tier 1 level. So, yeah, I get it. I'm not at a tier 1 level. I don't anticipate getting there either in the short term, but I need a training progression that gets me to as close to that as I can within my resources and time allotment. And so we have a data analysis package that we put onto our shooting programs that collects time and speed, time and accuracy standards, the drill, the number of rounds fired, the time that it is required to shoot it in, and it compares where you currently are as to what our metrics are of where you should be, and that provides you with the data analytics that you need to be able to get to the next level. So you don't just need to pass and fail. You need to be able to dive into how I actually performed in that drill. Where did I miss? What did I miss? Did I hit the time correctly? And if not, what was my time standard, and where does that time standard need to be? So it's not just pass and fail and whether I did a good job or a bad job. It's really more now from the scientific side. How can I provide quantifiable and qualifiable evidence to the shooter of where he is in his shooter progression? And that's what we bring to the table with our combat shooting.
And that's phenomenal. And we actually took a page out of your book, and we use your program in-house. And what we do is we run everybody through the drills on the timer. We've come up with our own spreadsheets that do all the formulas for us, so we can kind of see, hey, this is where we do tier 1 through 3, so we know who is best developed where. We're able to go back and redevelop our training to say, look, the high ready drills, low ready drills, the team's confident. Everybody makes a standard, everybody makes a time. However, we're getting hung up on rifle recoveries. So then we'll develop our training to reflect that.
Right.
And we try to get everybody at least to a certain standard. But I also like that we can use it, because now when we start setting up our 007 or our list of operations, and let's say, for example, we're going to run a linear assault. Well, we can look at this. I can say, hey, this person has a 97% accuracy rate with a pistol. He doesn't miss, man.
Right.
And he makes the times. So maybe that needs to be our 1 and 2 that's coming on and taking the train, right? Like,
right.
It's their experience. And at the end of the day, I mean, we have the information right in front of us that says, look, he is probably the best person for the job. So now we're putting the best players in the right seats. And, we wouldn't have that if it wasn't for you. Like, you exposed us to it, and it clicked right after the training. I'm like, yeah, we definitely got to have a goal.
Yeah. So
now we run our guys through it. They love it, and we have a platform to build. What does Redback One do to kind of make sure you guys are staying relevant? Because, training is a dynamic thing that's always changing. Sure. And, what we do today, tomorrow, we're going to be like, hey, we no longer do that. We don't do angle man corner bow. We don't do strong wall. We don't do, L ambushes because of this. What's next?
Yeah. And I think to that point, what we're seeing currently in Europe and in Ukraine is what the fallout of what's going to occur there is to understand, what our current adversaries are bringing to the table with regards to urban warfare in dense urban terrain, and the understanding of near-peer engagements and how that affects the playing field and how we need to adjust our tactics and SOPs when it comes to engaging with near-peer adversaries, where we might not own the night. We can't just get out there and nods and laser and shine these lasers continuously because of the fact that our adversaries may have night vision devices and thermal devices and be able to target us just as well. And so, to try and stay current on things like that, it behoves me as an instructor, as part of this machine, is that I have to do my due diligence and make sure that I'm staying on top of my game and researching and understanding what our adversaries are doing.
Yeah.
What we're doing. What is our current doctrine with regards to this? And some of the stuff that we do at Redback One, we don't release. Obviously, we don't release it because it has an effect. And that effect can be that it could put our warfighters in harm's way if we release certain things that we teach or train on. And so what you'll find on our social media accounts and stuff like that is a lot of benign type footage or imagery that doesn't necessarily disclose or showcase any current tactics, techniques, and procedures. Now, a lot of the things that we do to maintain currency outside of that is have a very healthy relationship with some of the units that we train with, and there's a trust and a vetting process there of an understanding that if I'm privy to any information, that it doesn't go any further, that we don't release that. And so whether that's within the community, folks that are either just getting out of some of these units, we try to bring them into our instructor cadre and help assist on different training courses. And when you've got guys that are current coming out of some of these units, and when you say, well, what is current? And oftentimes current could be within the last 5 years, within the last 10 years, depending on how advanced warfare has become. And we've seen from Afghanistan through to Iraq and now through into some of the newer, smaller campaigns that your relevance is maybe only a 5-year span. And I've been out of the unit for a while, but how is it that I've maintained my ability to bring currency to our tactics and shooting training? And it's because I'm very proactive in that space, and I make sure that I do bring in guys that have recent combat experience from these units to be able to assist and help develop and maintain our curriculum to where it needs to be, so that we are delivering the latest and greatest when it comes to combat shooting and tactics training.
Right. What courses do you guys have coming up soon?
We're over in California coming up shortly. We're going to be running a advanced deliberate CQB course, which is all night vision CQB, so it's all blacked out. That's all deliberate clearance, so it's live fire and also live target engagements and reality-based training on that course. It's all law enforcement specific. There's a 5-day combat shooting course that we're running close after that one in California. Excuse me. So that one, essentially the guts of that course is to enhance skill sets in pistol skills, pistol marksmanship, close quarters combat shooting with pistol and rifle, urban engagements of across the street type engagements, positional shooting, getting into and out of fire position, standing, kneeling, prone, stoppage clearances, all that kind of stuff. And then what we refer to as our dynamic approach shooting qualification, which is a run and gun assessment.
Right.
And then into day 5 on that course is our operator standards test out and dynamic approach shooting qualification test out as well. So that's a 5-day snapshot at our 5-day combat shooting course, which we pretty much reserve to military and law enforcement, just based on the time and money when it comes to that kind of thing. Locally here, we've got a combat shooting course in Norfolk, which is going to be hosted by Norfolk PD at the range there. And that's going to emulate what I just mentioned, that 5-day package. Oftentimes we shift and change some of the competencies there based on range constraints. And at Norfolk we have a range constraint there, so we can't get a 200-metre range. So we just reduce what we do and plug and play different modules based on any constraints that we have there. But that's going to be a great course. We're up in New Jersey next month for high-risk vehicle tactics. So our high-risk vehicle tactics course is basically a counter-ambush course, both static and mobile, and it's very similar to what we've been running for the US military over the last several years, and that is actions on contact from the front, from the rear, and from the flanks, whether you're static or mobile, and procedures on engaging from within inside the vehicle, emergency evacuation procedures and getting to set points and deploying out onto the ground, moving to points of cover, shoot, move, and communicate. And then on the law enforcement side, obviously there's a need and an understanding that we're not just going to disappear into the night like on a special forces mission, that we get contacted and bumped out of our car and we're gone and get picked up later. On the law enforcement side, obviously we're not going to give that ground up. We're going to secure the ground, get security, and then we're going to fight forward and secure the ground, neutralise threats, and make the area safe for the general public, right? Yep. So that's part of the course packet there as well on the law enforcement side. So it's high-risk felony stops, it's traffic stops that go wrong where a gun or a weapon is produced with no notice, what to do on those types of situations and where to go, how to maintain survivability, one, and then how to enhance your methods of interdiction or lethality when it comes to engaging the suspects, particularly on the domestic civilian side, because of the need for precision fire. It's not like in military you can use effective fire into likely enemy positions to achieve your aim and regain the initiative and then fight forward. And obviously in law enforcement, you've got the background to worry about all the time and where the general public are. And so that precision fire and understanding what your constraints are with regards to that is really important.
Yeah, definitely phenomenal. Yeah, I know a couple guys that are going to be hitting these courses. The website for them to check it out?
It's www.redback1.com.
Okay, fantastic. And we'll drop the link below. Jason, I could definitely talk to you for hours. And what I'd like to do is, if you guys have any questions for Jason, I'd like to maybe bring you back sometime. Maybe we could dive into your experiences in selection. I'd like to hear what else you did even before you went to selection, right? So if you have any questions, comments, just put them down below, and we'll try to get them answered. Hey, look, man, I appreciate you coming through. All right.
Thanks. Thanks for having me out here. Blake, really appreciate it. And anytime, just hit me up. I'm happy to come back.
You got it, man. We'll see you soon.